Good morning. Welcome to episode 114 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the construction, water well, and geothermal drilling industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy, and this week in the news, we're going to talk about 2024 extreme weather impacts. Next, Florida removing all language of climate change from the government legislature. Beyond that, it's time we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and what it looks like after the 2024 elections. This week's feature, I'm so very excited about. It's with Bill Nowak, original executive director and one of the founders of the New York Geothermal organization, in which, my opinion, it's one of the best run geothermal organizations with wonderfully executed education, advocacy, and all around championship for ground source geothermal in the country. And you can see that through the work they do with the local government to the state government onto DC. We love you guys over at the New York Geo, and I can't wait for you to hear what Bill's going to talk about. But before we talk extreme weather and geothermal organizations, let's talk some safety. For this week in safety, I want to talk about risk assessment and risk mitigation. Last week, I gave you a challenge. I heard back on a couple of your tailgate talks, and they are great. I heard back on some that I was just like, why we should use gloves. Hand safety, very important. But yes, we need to make sure our tailgate talks dive into things that we do every day, our tasks, how we assess these risks, how we mitigate these risks, how we assess our hazards. And now it's hot. We've been talking about this. Why we're talking about this is because heat-related illnesses, extreme weather, it's impacting our job sites, distracting our people, and fatiguing them. And I want you to think about our most hazardous tasks performed, and they happen late in the day. Because if it was raining and extreme weather of some sort early morning, we'd shut down and reevaluate what we were doing today. But instead, we have our people in the field, and now they're tripping pipe or they're investigating a pump failure. And you got to start thinking about what are they getting involved in and how they can be impacted. If you don't have a near miss reporting system, you're missing out on major assessing of hazards and risks and possible bodily injury and equipment damage. So NGWA just had a great talk on this a week or two ago. Go check out their hazard and risk assessment Q&A and webinar they did. John Fowler and the rest of the crew that advocate for safeties over there do a great job. We can be advocating for safety every day. We need to make sure we have that stop work authority. And again, I want you to think about the tasks at hand, and I want you to talk to your crews. And again, it's hot. There's a storm coming in. What shortcuts do we take? What happens? How are we distracted? And that's how we get hurt. And that comes back to those good hazard assessments and risk mitigation. Think about how we've talked about Cooper's Code. What color are we operating in right now? And the biggest thing that we need to know when we train our people right, they have the right personal protective equipment. They understand the best tools and equipment for that process with a good standard operating procedure. Then we have people that make good choices and they stay safe. And the final piece, leaders on the job site, you have the ability to change the tempo of that job, slow it up, make sure everybody's on the same page and they're being safe. And again, when Mother Nature rears her head in heat, lightning, hail, wind, we need to be seeking shelter and slowing the job site down. Go out, be safe. For this week in the news, maybe it's because in less than a few weeks, I'm going to be 44 years old, but we're going to talk about the weather because man, is it hot across the country. And we've went from a few weeks ago seeing the Southwest through the Gulf Coast having record heat, Florida, to now this week, the entire country being in the mid 80s, upper 90s, and on. Mexico has been in a heat dome for nearly a month, with Mexico City placing many areas in 0-day scenarios. That's where they go into water rationing. This is a bad deal. And you can go back and listen to last week about strategic water reserves and understand how big of a deal this is. The average temperature for the United States in the first 6 months of the year was 3.8 degrees above average. And that average was the last 100 years. Sure, it's easy for us to put our head in the sand and say, it's an El Nino year. It's always going to be hot in the summer, Brock. But pay more attention. They're talking right now about temperatures in the South Atlantic near Florida being similar to what they should be in August, not June. Last year's extreme weather and climate change events, there was over a dozen events that cost $1 billion or more. That is the cost it took to restore affected communities. 40% of the US population, 127 million Americans, live in coastal communities. In the past 80 years, it's been reported that sea level rise has been 1 foot. What's crazy about this is 8 inches of that foot came in the last 30 years. This was a study performed by the University of Miami and founded by senior researcher Brian McNulty. That's a big deal, everybody. A few weeks ago, I was at Companies for Net Zero event in Los Angeles, where we talked about decarbonization. And in the discussion, we started talking about climate change and the impacts on inner city residents. And the question was proposed for Los Angeles: what does 100 years look like? And how many residents would actually still be living in the inner city, or if it would be commuting? And that same discussion, as they said, there would be much less people living in downtown LA. Miami, where will it be in 100 years? And that's a pretty wild thing to think about, because Miami is 6.5 feet above sea level. Most of the Florida peninsula is at low elevations. Think about as we go into the middle of the peninsula, but that 7 to 10 feet elevation, most of the coast. New Orleans, Boston, San Francisco will also be in the same boat as Miami with flooding. Collectively, 273,000 Americans, 171,000 properties in these coastal regions will be impacted by 2050. So let's go back to Florida and consider the peninsula, which came out of water from the sea level dropping. And now are we just saying this is Mother Nature righting herself, completing that circle? Or do our initiatives to hit carbon neutral by 2050 slow down this impact of sea level rise and the depletion of the ice caps? Climate change is speeding up sea level rise and flooding. Do you know there's a term in Florida called sunny day Florida flooding? Sunny day flooding? No, sunny day flooding. They're building walls to keep water out. In 2 weeks, on July 1st, legislation signed by Florida Governor DeSantis will remove most reference to climate change in government paperwork and legislation. This is my question, industry. Finding renewable, cleaner energy sources that removes us from foreign energy sources. Is that bipartisan? Is this just a crazy hippie concept? Let's just agree that saving the planet, protecting water, especially groundwater, reducing volatile gases that we release into the air and atmosphere should be important regardless of the party affiliation. What it cost for Katrina as a Category 3 storm in 20 years has been $200 billion. I spoke earlier about 12 major events, over $1 billion last year. Katrina and many areas have not been restored. Beyond Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, 2017, $158 billion. Hurricane Ian, 2022, Florida's most costliest hurricane, $118.5 billion. By the way, that was a Category 4. Let's agree climate change is real. And according to the Journal of Nature article published March 6th of 2024, 32 coastal cities will be impacted by major flooding events from now to 2050, and we're seeing it. We think 2050. Brock, that's 25 and a half years from now. That's not a major defining point yet. Think about all of our milestones to 2050. So that's a goal for us here in the United States and the world. It's hard to consider 25 years. I get that. You know what's easier to consider? Where we'll be in 20 weeks. That's November 5th, 2024. And this isn't a discussion about who you're electing for president. The question is, as we elect those donkeys and elephants into the Oval Office, how do we continue our participation in a 2050 carbon neutral initiative that we've agreed upon with 280 other countries? Past 6 months, I've traveled from East Coast to West Coast, participating on roundtables with green, renewable energy professionals and listening to experts discuss our future. From Manhattan, LA, Chicago, Boston, Washington, D.C., the same topic came up. What happens to the Inflation Reduction Act after November 5th, 2024? And obviously, February 2025. So I ask you, industry, what does happen? Because the answers that came up in all of these discussions is we continue our initiatives. And that happens from the governors that are blazing the way, like the governor of New York and Massachusetts, and 22 other states, including Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin, and also Puerto Rico and Guam. It's a lot of red states and a lot of blue states, but it's only 24 of our 50. So we need to be thinking about that. That 24 represents 55% of the United States population and 60% of our total US economy. So it's important that we continue down these roads. It's important for insurance purposes and reliability and goodwill, and the fact that we will be displacing nearly 300,000 immediate Americans, damaging almost 200,000 properties just in sea level rise. The Department of Defense recognizes flooding as a strategic issue and has been aligning their bases to this. This is it. So, the answer, we can't afford to reverse, defund, change, or all out remove the Inflation Reduction Act. Because that act is more than just crazy money giving away on ideas and semiconductors and eliminating your barbecue grill. That's not what's happening here. You know what is happening? It's $21 billion for farmers and rural communities to make food production for more resiliency to climate change. It's $2.6 billion that is combined with federal infrastructure law money for those coastal cities to make them more resilient for extreme weather. Think about Katrina was as bad as it was as a category 3 for the pumps and levees family. Yeah, it does have $135 billion for clean energy tax credits, including biofuels, including cleaning up communities, making more power infrastructure, hot rock geothermal, and the big one that we have until 2033, those tax credits that include ground source heat pumps and geothermal loop installation incentives. The goal of the Inflation Reduction Act from the beginning was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the goal was to get 40% below our 2005 levels by 2030. Beyond that, the opportunity for new jobs created by this initiative is endless, including drilling jobs, centers of excellences, R&D for drilling, new pump technology, chips, semiconductors. There's so much happening here that we need to be having that discussion on the technology and R&D. Go to the DOE report from December 2023 talking about ground source heat pumps, low temperature geothermal. It's time for us to understand the importance that we have with this opportunity with the Inflation Reduction Act, from hot rock geothermal to the oil and gas folks for all their technologies for hot rock, onto all the things we can do in drilling solar farms, wind turbines, and of course, geothermal heat pumps and loops, and seeing that we can convert a big chunk of our power consumption to ground source geothermal heating and cooling. The numbers are out there. We save $1 trillion on the electric infrastructure cost. It eliminates 48,000 miles of new transmission lines and transmission lines upgrades. So 20 weeks to election day. Question isn't donkeys or elephants. I wish your choice the best of luck. I want you to think about this. There are 52 members of Congress, 8 senators, and 44 House of Representatives that are not returning. They have announced they're not seeking re-election. 26 senators are seeking re-election. Also, spend time, and all 435 House seats are up for election. It's speculated from elephants to donkeys, the separation will be 4 or 5 seats either way for the House. It's razor thin. And I trust you to pick the best advocate for groundwater, for our resources, for clean energy, for productive jobs, for the respect of what the drilling industry needs. So in 20 weeks, the greatest opportunity we have to advocate for our industry to promote our industry and impact renewable energy, Inflation Reduction Act, climate change. What Miami looks like in 100 years is in your hands voting. I want you to think about that. It's pretty lofty there. We got a lot going on from state to state to the national level that impacts drilling, construction, geothermal, resource drilling, education, the trades. That's all I'm asking you to think about as you go to the polls. For this week's feature, let's talk about what we do 21 weeks from now and the rest of the time. And that's to advocate for our industry, educate consumers and others that aren't in our industry, advocate, join together, work on the right legislation, help get wide-scale adoption and access for geothermal, ground source, heat loops, clean water, the right rare earth minerals from the right place. We do that through our associations. At the national level, we have the National Groundwater Association and we have the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association. We got groundwater, we got geothermal heat loops. There's other big organizations out there as well. It's the National Drilling Association that's kicking butt at educating on geotech and environmental and safety, blazing the way. And we love everything you're doing out there, Sam and team. Then we got our state associations. These are very important because we come together at our state, we go to our local and to our state level, we advocate. We've seen Georgia do some great things in advocating for groundwater and getting to a point where if you have more than 1 acre, you can have a private water well, regardless if you're in the middle of a municipality. And that leads me into my interview with Bill Nowak, who is the original executive director and one of the founders of the New York Geothermal organization. One of the great things that I love about this organization is their camaraderie, their collaboration, their advocacy, and their education. From the utility level to big companies, to clients, to nonprofits, to drillers, and working with the Empire State Groundwater Association, which is the New York Groundwater Association. They do a heck of a job. Great job. John and Christine and Zach had all of them. I'm apologizing because I'm blanking on everybody, but you all kick butt. And we love it. We love what you've done because you've blazed the way for the rest of the country and how we should advocate. With that said, I introduce you to Bill Nowak. We're at the end of the New York Geo Conference, which was in April. It's a little noisy. People are tearing down, but we had a great conversation. And there's a lot you can learn here. Hi, this is Brock Yorty. We are live at New York Geo, and it's wrapping up the second day. And we got an awesome opportunity to grab Bill, and I'll let him introduce himself. But a lot of everything that's happening in the state of New York and blazing the way. New York Geo has these great founding members that got us to where we are and how the rest of the country is reacting. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit how you got started in this.
Sure. My name's Bill Nowak. I'm a Buffalo, New York native. Was the executive director of New York Geo from 2014 to 2022. I got started because I had been working for the New York State Senate. And there was someone, my boss was head of the Environmental Conservation Committee, so I was a staffer for that. And I got a phone call from Jens Ponekow, this guy from Buffalo Geothermal. At the time, renewable heating was not a thought in anyone's mind. There were very strict silos between what could be spent with money that was collected from gas customers and what could be spent from money that was collected from electric customers. And geothermal did not fit into that. So there was no consciousness of geothermal as a way forward. There was no way to fund it under the rules. And Jens called saying, what can we do about this? And I was really impressed with what he had to say and how he explained the technology, and got involved with him from there, kind of working with the Department of Environmental Conservation and with NYSERDA, getting them interested in the technology. My boss actually lost his election after that. I was out in the world doing different kinds of work, and folks who had geothermal technology were looking to start an organization. I got together with them and we formed New York Geo, and the rest is history.
And that was just 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yep.
That's not that long ago.
It's true. It's true. I mean, it's all in perspective. Given what's going on with the climate at this point, we need to move very, very fast, and we're not moving fast enough. New York is moving well, but it needs to be moving even more stronger than it is. So, yeah, it's not that long ago, but time's a wasting.
So for the viewers out there that aren't from New York or the East Coast,
yes,
time's ticking away, and our 2030 goals are not
That's right.
that far away.
Yep.
What should we be doing?
Moving with all due speed, increasing what is happening, for the geothermal industry. That means getting the drillers in place that we need. It means getting the incentives in place. Geothermal is the technology that's going to really make it possible, because it is the technology that's going to make it possible to move forward without really impacting the grid the way other technologies will. So there really needs to be an all-out focus. There needs to be policy in place that's going to allow it to happen, and the industry really needs to step up its game. We've got legislation right now in front of the New York State Legislature connected to the budget. It needs to happen during the budget process, which is wrapping up in the next 4 or 5 days, and it includes an increase in the geothermal tax credit, making that refundable so that low-income folks can deal with it. It also includes something called the New York Heat Act. At this point, they're set up, the utility companies are, to spend about $33 billion more than they need to between now and 2050 on gas infrastructure that's going to be obsolete by the time we get to 2050. And that needs to stop. There is legislation that will allow a smooth transition to happen off that kind of gas infrastructure.
So, advice to an individual outside of the heating and cooling industry, or that understands that we forgot that Canada was on fire for 8 months last year. Other than the smoke, we just all stopped talking about it. What could we be saying to residential homes or to developers that are on the fence or just don't quite understand ground source geothermal as a value?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to keep in your mind the destruction that is happening and coming relative to climate change. And I think being able to kind of work through that is a good thing to do, kind of having a personal story in relation to it that you can kind of pull up and kind of take hope from, and also realize the seriousness. I think, paying attention, we are all actors within this system. There is so much power that you can have just communicating with the legislator about it. At this point, the fossil fuel interests are gearing up. They're spending millions of dollars doing robocalls, trying to stir people up against the transition. Every voice that counters that really, really matters. And people don't necessarily realize that. They don't see their power, and they don't realize the seriousness of the situation.
There's a bit of fear about the fossil fuel industry displacing workers and truckers and whatnot, but New York's done a pretty good job of saying we have other jobs, and we can have multiple generations of future if we do it this way.
When you think about it, making a big transition, moving everybody into a different technology, that is way more jobs than just maintaining the current technology. It's a question of getting people comfortable with making that move. If you have a particular job that you're doing and you don't see a clear path to the next job, yes, it's a threat. It's a threat. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. Change is scary, but change is really necessary. And overall, it's going to be a positive thing. We just need to be able to communicate how that's going to happen.
I think about adopting technology, and I saw this great statistic. In 2010, 4.7 billion people on the planet had a cell phone, which was 2 out of 3 people.
Okay.
At that same time, according to World Health Organization and UNICEF, 1 out of 3 people on the planet didn't have access to clean water or sanitation. And we think about scaling a technology. If we could all get to these, how can we not see?
Sure, sure. And the kind of superiority of the technology became apparent to people through use. That's one of the great things geothermal has going for it, is when people talk to a neighbor that has actually experienced it and has it in their home, that's the way you make it happen. The first example I saw of that was Jens Ponekow and Buffalo Geothermal with a church in small Akron, New York. They were spending $18,000 a year on their oil bill. The church was going to go under. They went geo. The church is doing fine. Most of the church's constituents got really interested in geothermal really fast.
We're sitting here, and Climate Control Group, brought us out to do some interviews along with us doing our interviews. And I think back to a conversation I had at NGWA about the Norton Commons project that they're involved in. And there's homes where homeowners didn't even know they had geothermal. It was so reliable.
Wow.
And they saw a drill rig. They ran out there and they go, I want that. And the young man goes, we already installed it before you moved in, man.
Wow. Yeah.
So
yeah,
I appreciate your time and your thought leadership on what we're doing. And it's wild to think it's only been 10 years. And what can we do in another 10?
York, you've got a great reputation preceding you with all the work you've done with drilling. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And you're asking about another 10 years?
Yeah.
We got to get there cleaning up the electricity supply, which is something that's a real goal in New York and is likely to happen. And just getting the word out, getting the industry built up so the industry can really supply people with geothermal, and then letting people know about it.
Thank you for your time today. This was
Of course.
Great.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you for joining us for episode 114 of the Driller Newscast. Check out thedriller.com. Great content coming out every day. Got lots of great things happening on our socials, LinkedIn, Facebook. 20 weeks. Pay attention. We got a lot at stake here, from a strategic water reserve to the Inflation Reduction Act to the Farm Bill that the United States Department of Agriculture needs to be able to help fund our point of entry hookups to eliminate PFAS and lead. There's a lot of pieces moving, and our big government, as we say, it's not my problem. I just need my local stuff. I don't like anybody, or however extreme we go. Groundwater, clean environment, clean air, the waters of the United States, drilling, it's bipartisan. Has to be to give it right for everybody to have clean air, clean water, and a resilient food source. Go out, be safe. Thanks, everybody.